Welcome back to Pod of the Century. Galen Clavio joining you here. Daniel Eves joining me as well. I think we're the only ones that are going to talk today. Day after Thanksgiving here in the United States. And we just got done watching USA England. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the rest of the games today. A lot of action. We'll also talk about the games yesterday, as we didn't have our normal podcast due to the holiday here in the United States, but we can certainly cover what occurred. Daniel, first of all, good to see you. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm recovering from eating a lot of food yesterday, which I think probably a fair amount of this country is recovering from. And I'm explaining to my friends back home what Thanksgiving is.
There you go. Do they get it at all?
The concept behind it, no, but the idea of getting to eat effectively Christmas dinner a month before Christmas is quite exciting to some, yeah.
That's good. Okay, I'm always curious about this. Is the dinner on Christmas and then the presents are on Boxing Day? Is that how it's supposed to work?
In theory, my understanding is Boxing Day is where you're boxing up the gifts you got on Christmas. So Christmas, the presents are the same as you guys do it over here, but Boxing Day is just everything goes back in the boxes. The ornaments go in the boxes, take them to the loft, and then you're done.
So you just tear Christmas down the day after, then.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, we're practical.
We normally keep it around until about the end of the first week of January in the U.S., I've noticed. And it's mostly just like, I think everybody's in the spirit. You wait till New Year, and then it's like, I guess somebody's got to take all this stuff down and put it in the garage, but we don't do it right away. That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no, that's a little bit unnecessary for us. We like to get back to it. New Year's Eve, that's another excuse to party. So we want to give that its own time.
We do that as well here, although in Bloomington, where I am based and you are based part-time, not a lot of people going out on New Year's. Everybody stays home. It's sad. In the big cities, different story, but here, not as much. Anyway, a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and just launch right in here as we're on MatchDay 6, and we're already into the second round of the group stages. We had Group A and Group B back in action today, and the big one that everybody was waiting for, Fox ran, I think, approximately 18,000 commercials for the game that happened today, and it finally occurred. And USA England 0-0 draw after 90 minutes. People, I think, understandably pretty excited here in the United States as a result of this outcome. I'm guessing not quite the same with the English fans. Let's start with your perspective on things. You watched the whole match. What was your takeaway from this game?
I mean, I'm certainly disappointed. I think we were on a high after beating Iran 6-2. Iran being a team we saw today actually aren't just a walkover team. They have something about them. So 6-2 proves to be actually a very good result. But it's the same old story. We looked defensive. We looked very passive. We looked stagnant. It was passing it around the back with no intention. There was no one going direct at any defenders. And we're the favorites. It's England versus the US. It's a classic underdog story. The US always wants to pick off England. And we got to be going at the US. We can't let them attack us. It's not going to work psychologically, but also just for the game. They're a young, energetic team. So I was disappointed. I thought Gareth Southgate talked about taking the shackles off the offense in the first game, which we did. It was free flowing. We had shots firing. Today they were so timid. Kane had a shot in maybe the 20th minute, and after that we really didn't have a clear-cut chance at all. And that can't be happening against a team like the US if we really want to progress.
I was shocked. I really was. I mean, the U.S. was bossing the midfield for pretty much the entire game. The U.S. was exploiting the flanks for about the first 60 minutes. And I do think Southgate deserves credit because he made some tactical changes at halftime that really slowed down what the U.S. was doing on the flanks. But even with those changes, as you said, England never really had any clear-cut chances in the second half, except for that very last free kick setup where Kane sent the ball wide. I mean, that one was legitimately terrifying. But everything else outside of that, I mean, I would not go so far as to say that the U.S. like deserved a win, because I think at the end of the day, I mean, the U.S.'s lack of clinicality with the opportunities that they did have was frankly somewhat similar to what we saw in the Wales game. Like they weren't able to capitalize on what they were generating. But I was very surprised at how almost effortlessly the U.S. was able to conjure up chances, dribble the ball out of danger. It was almost all dribbling. Like it was, it was short passes and dribbling, and it was a lot of small movements. They weren't bombing the ball down the field. They weren't putting themselves in a position where they were kind of hoping. Like they looked like they had a legitimate plan of action. So as a U.S. fan, I'm pleased. I won't say I'm thrilled, because I think, I would say that the best two shots of the game, I think the U.S. had both of those. One of them was that Pulisic shot that caromed off the woodwork late in the first half, and the other one was probably that McKinney shot that just went entirely over the bar. So it's not like the U.S. was necessarily hard done by, because I think they could have scored on either of those chances. But I am very pleased. I think especially with the way that the USA's defensive back line was able to handle it when England got into the box. I mean, they really did a great job of cutting off passing angles, cutting off shooting angles, and frustrating, not just Harry Kane, but Raheem Sterling. Rashford came in, really didn't do anything while he was in there either. That was probably the thing I was expecting the least. And even that late giveaway by Zimmerman on that pass that led to the free kick that had the Kane chance. I mean, that was about the biggest transgression the U.S. defense had in this whole game.
Yeah, I think there was no threat really going forward. Sterling was non-existent. Saka was pretty non-existent. When Grealish came on, he offered something different. He actually he got the ball and just drived like right at the defender, which was completely different. It was obvious Southgate had told him to be direct, so got to give Southgate some credit for that. But no one else was doing that. Kane, when he got the ball, he didn't really have anyone to play it off to. He's used to having Heung-min Son like sprinting down the line or cutting, making an angle through. There was none of that. Sterling looked extremely lackluster. Rashford touched the ball maybe 3 times when he got on. So it's worrying signs for England offensively after playing so well against Iran, that a team like the US can suppress that attack that easily. But from the US perspective, I think there's definitely more positives than negatives, although the glaring negative is the fact that there's nothing going in the back of the net.
Yeah.
And you can't score. You can't win if you don't score.
No, and I mean, and even the goal that they scored against Wales was, it wasn't against the run of play per se, but it was not a typical goal scoring opportunity. It really required like a couple of things happening before it in order to make it even occur. But that was always kind of an issue. I mean, I did think that Wright did a better job than Sargent of getting into position. Pulisic was in a better frame of mind and was clearly getting a lot of things kind of in general position offensively for this team. But they do lack punch up front. They really don't have anybody that scares you when it comes to, having the ball in possession in the final third and being able to put a shot on goal. And set piece wise, I mean, probably the best chances for the U.S. came in that series of corners that they managed to generate at the beginning of the second half. And I was really disappointed in most of those chances at the end. Even the one that went through the box and, Zimmerman was somewhat close to it. It's like, well, it would have been a real surprise if he had actually been able to finish that one off. So look, I mean, I think both teams, it's interesting because England didn't have to win today. And to some degree, I'm not going to say, I mean, I thought all the people that were predicting that the U.S. was going to get like walloped in this game, I actually thought they were going to draw. Now, I thought there would be goals scored. I thought it'd be a little bit more back and forth from an offensive perspective. But, from the perspective of who needed it more, who needed a result more, clearly the U.S. needed a result more with what happened earlier on today. They're still in good shape, and it's a very easy calculus for the U.S. at this point, because if they win, they're in. And that's nice, against Iran. But I will also say that I was surprised at how lifeless England looked. And I can't tell if it was because they knew that they didn't need a result and they just decided that they weren't going to overly risk things, knowing that the U.S. was unlikely to capitalize, or if it's something, as you said, to be more concerned about. Because I don't remember them turning in a performance like this in the Euros. Like, it felt like they were a lot more on the front foot, and really, I don't recall. Maybe I'm wrong, and tell me if I'm wrong here. Like, I don't recall them having a game where they just looked as insipid as they did offensively as they did in this one.
No, I think certainly looked more structured all around throughout the Euros. We certainly didn't play as offensive as we did against Iran, but I think today it's interesting, and it may go to show that Southgate hasn't taken the shackles off, like you said, and we're just going to remain the conservative footballing side that we've seen over the last few tournaments. And it realistically, it will probably get us to the quarterfinals or the semifinals. But when you're playing one of the other top teams, maybe a Brazil or an Argentina, maybe a France, they're going to beat us on that. They'll be able to score against us, even if we are conservative, because our defense is not our strong point. Our front line is our strong point, and our midfield. So we should be utilizing that and playing attacking football. But instead, we play conservative football. At least it's not a 5 at the back, but today an expected goals of 0.5 against the US that's not good. I mean, any game which the expected goals for both teams combines to barely over 1 is not a good game of football. But
and particularly since, I mean, England's XG in the first half was, I think, 0.3. To get even less than that in the second half really does kind of make you scratch your head. It's like, why so conservative here? Because it's not like, as you mentioned, like the offense is the strong point for this England team. It's not like the defense is the strong point for the USA.
I mean, it was the Jordan Henderson sub, I think, said it all.
Yeah.
It's about the 70th minute. It's 0-0 against the US. We know that a draw is a solid result for us, but we're still so conservative, or Gareth Southgate's still so conservative, that he brings Jordan Henderson on, an aging holding midfielder who probably shouldn't have made the squad realistically. There's a lot more up-and-coming talent. The only reason he made the squad is because Southgate likes to keep the players who he knows and has played for him many, many times.
Yeah.
So that was a slightly disappointing sub from my perspective. I would have loved to see a little bit more aggression. The fact that Phil Foden doesn't get subbed on, starting every game for one of the top 3 clubs in the world, and the best manager of all time arguably starts him every single week, but Gareth Southgate doesn't think he can get on the England side. That's really questionable from my perspective. And if he doesn't get many minutes in the World Cup, I think there'll be some serious questions asked from Southgate as to his reasoning behind that.
Well, and especially with Mason Mount getting as many minutes as he's getting, it's just a big head scratcher. I agree. And what's interesting is this game gets thrown into sharper relief with the result from the game at 5:00 this morning here in the U.S. as Iran beats Wales 2-0. I got up early, watched this whole game. This was an entertaining game, but almost entirely because of Iran. As you know, they were on the front foot pretty much the whole time. They were pressing. They looked like they were going to walk out of there with a very disappointing 0-0 draw until Chesney scores the latest regulation winner in World Cup history, 90+8, and then they score again 3 minutes later. Iran, who everybody had left for dead, understandably so, after England had basically dismantled them in that first game. They looked like they wanted to be anywhere other than the World Cup. They came back and were clearly the superior team basically through the entire 90+ minutes, which raises a whole bunch of questions about what we thought we knew about this group. I mean, it looked like from the way that Wales played, the way they came back in the second half against the U.S., it looked like they were clearly a team that was en route to challenging for a qualifying place, maybe even challenging for the group win. You get this result today, and it's like, well, wait, Iran is actually good now, and Wales suddenly looked very old. It was a big question mark here in the U.S. because we watched that and we were like, wow, is the U.S. like the worst team in the group because they couldn't handle this Wales team? I don't know. Like, you can't reconcile that with what the U.S. did, but just Iran by itself, like big show of hands for them, big levels of applause because they produced something I don't think anybody thought they were capable of.
Yeah, I I mean, I looked at the lineups and I saw Kiefer Moore was starting for Wales, and I thought that's it. Kiefer Moore against that Iranian back line, after seeing the Iranian back line against England, will cut them to shreds, especially with Bale just playing off him. But that's not what we saw at all. I think maybe Wales could have benefited from the same lineup that they played before, with maybe Kiefer Moore playing, but with Dan James still there. He offers something that Bale doesn't in the consistent running. Bale's just too old these days to run for 90 minutes, whereas Dan James hassles. And Wales looked a bit flat when they didn't have the ball. Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting it, but it is the World Cup, and Iran are the 20th ranked team in the world according to FIFA. So they're not a nobody team. They clearly were overwhelmed against England, but that happens. Sometimes the floodgates open. They had exterior motives behind their performance, but they bounced back, and fair play to them. It's makes the final match of this group just mouthwatering.
We get two really good final match days that we already know about, because and we'll come back to what's going to happen in Group B a little bit later on, but we'll talk about the games that happened in Group A today as well. Netherlands Ecuador ends up a 1-1 draw. It really feels like Ecuador should have won like 3-1 in this game, as they had a goal really questionably ruled offside, or well, that wasn't even offside. I guess it technically was offside, but at the end of the first half. And then another goal kind of questionably ruled off in the second half. But they looked awesome. I mean, Enner Valencia, who people have largely forgotten about because he's playing in Turkey right now, scores a goal in this game to go with the couple of goals that he had in the first game. And the Netherlands just looked weak, like surprisingly so. It continues this odd string of bad performances for UEFA teams, where they scored the first goal. Gakpo had a really nice goal early on, and then they offered essentially nothing the rest of the game, and should consider themselves fortunate for even getting a point out of this. This sets up a really fascinating scenario, because the Netherlands is still in pretty good shape, but now, much like we saw with this England game, where it's like, well, now there's questions popping up based on this performance. A lot of questions have to pop up based upon how the Netherlands played today.
Yeah, 100%. And I thought Ecuador were brilliant. And I think we saw it after the Qatar game. I think there were some people certainly think that Ecuador could make some noise in this tournament, especially coming out of that group. Certainly better than their 44th ranking in FIFA. But their performance today was extremely impressive. And we shouldn't take XG too much into account, but when it's so damning like this, it's really interesting. Ecuador had near 1.7 XG. Netherlands had 0.1 the whole game. That's crazy. The Netherlands against Ecuador. I mean, it was a solo moment of brilliance for Gakpo to get that goal. But realistically, they didn't deserve a goal. Yeah. It was just Gakpo's been their beacon of light this tournament. And for the rest of it, they've looked deflated. And they've got some brilliant players in that team. So it's just, I don't know whether it's the coaching or if it's the chemistry or whatever it is, but they don't look like a team which is going to make it past the round of 16 or quarterfinals.
No, they didn't look good against Senegal either, which is the thing that people forget. Maybe already, I don't know, maybe they've forgotten that, but it's like that should have been the alarm in that performance. And then Ecuador came in and again, they really performed well in this one, and probably should feel harshly done by in that they only got a point. But they're in good shape to some degree now, because they play Senegal in the final and essentially just need a point to go through, because Senegal was able to take care of business today against Qatar. Qatar becomes the first host country in World Cup history to get eliminated by the second game of the group stage. Not something that you want on your resume. They looked very outclassed today against Senegal. They had a couple of good moments, but by and large, Senegal, despite what I think is almost undisputably the worst goalkeeping thus far in the tournament, maybe with Costa Rica accepted, but maybe there's some mitigating circumstances there. But Senegal, despite that, was able to pick up all 3 points to against the host nation.
Yeah, and I thought Qatar at least came out and got some shots on goal, which was almost nice to see from the neutral. Obviously, not many people supporting Qatar as a neutral, but you always want a team like that to actually get out of their own box. But Senegal, I think a lot of people were pretty high on them coming out of this tournament. I don't know if they're actually going to get too far. Maybe if Mane comes back, that'll make a big difference. But I wasn't too convinced by their performance today, and I think that Ecuador should get a point from them. I wonder if there'll be a tale of Ecuador getting a goal early and then sitting back, or if they just sit back the whole game and then try to soak up the Senegal pressure. And if that happens, then maybe Senegal can get a result. I'm a big fan of not doing that. I don't believe that sitting and taking pressure, especially in a World Cup game, will work. And I think that Senegal will really push for Mane to come back for that game. I don't know if he will be able to, but I would be very surprised if he doesn't make at least a 10-minute cameo towards the end of that game if the game needs a result for them.
Real quick, let's look back on what happened yesterday. Some Group H and Group G games. Switzerland knocks off Cameroon 1-0. I think that was a fairly predictable result. I thought Cameroon played better than I thought that they would, but the Swiss a little better organized, and they get the goal early on in the second half. They pick up that victory. And then, of course, in the other game in that group, Brazil gets some individual moments of brilliance out of Richarlison in the second half, and he scores 2 goals. But overall, I mean, Brazil just looked really dominant in that game against Serbia, as one might have expected. Brazil, now they're not having Neymar for the next 2 games. Neymar goes out with a really disgusting looking ankle. If you haven't seen the pictures, go check it out, folks. He definitely got beat up in that game quite a bit, as one might have expected. But kind of, I think with both of those results, it largely was what I would have expected. And certainly Serbia have a lot more to do now than Switzerland, because Switzerland's got 3 points in hand. Anything out of that group that really stuck out to you yesterday?
I was impressed by Brazil's performance. I was impressed by their fluidity up top. I thought on paper, they have a lot of stars up top, but I didn't know if they were going to gel well together. But some of the interplay between them, especially in the last 20 minutes, actually with Neymar out of the frame, there was just classic tiki-taka movement. It was just a firing range for the last 50 minutes. It kind of seemed like everyone wanted to get on the score sheet. But that's a worrying sign, because Serbia are a very intact team. They're no walkover. And I know it was only 2-0, but Brazil dominated the whole game, and they are looking as if they should deserve the title to be favorites.
That's who I picked. So I'm going to keep taking credit for that until they lose, and then we'll just forget that I ever made that pick in the first place. In the other group, Portugal, in a very bizarre game, knocks off Ghana. I was actually really impressed with what Ghana was able to do offensively in this one. They really did look like they had it going, but hard to keep Portugal out of the back of the net. Portugal, to some degree, though, I think is probably got to feel lucky that Ghana didn't nab a third goal late in this game, because that's kind of how it felt like it was going to go. And then, of course, in the other one, South Korea, I think, deserves a lot of credit. They really went toe-to-toe with Uruguay. They really frustrated Uruguay defensively, and that game ends up in a draw, probably a fair result for both. And it's going to be fascinating now, because I felt like both of those teams put in a better performance overall than Portugal did, given the relative strength of them versus Ghana. And that really does set up some fascinating matches here over the second and third match days in this group, because I think I would not begrudge the idea that South Korea and Uruguay can both beat Portugal, which would really throw the whole group wide open at this point.
Yeah, 100%. We talked on a previous podcast about how a lot of the favorites had either been overperforming in their first game or underperforming in their first game. I think Portugal greatly underperformed. They did not impress me at all. They obviously have insane firepower up top, and they're going to get those questionable calls with Ronaldo.
That Ronaldo penalty is the single most questionable call we've seen all tournament thus far.
It will happen naturally. I mean, it's entertainment at the end of the day, and if the greatest player, arguably the greatest player in the tournament, he's not. He's the second greatest player in the tournament. Arguably the greatest player in the tournament goes down in the box, they're going to give him that penalty, and because they know he's going to take it. South Korea and Uruguay, I was extremely impressed with South Korea. They were the most organized team I've seen in a long time. They moved in unison as a line across, just flat lines, which is rare to see, but it was quite mesmerizing almost to watch. It was screaming 0-0 from early on in the game. It was just, there was nothing going to break down South Korea, even with Uruguay's threat up top. So yeah, I think that group is wide open. I think South Korea and Uruguay can definitely get a result out of Portugal. I'm sad for Ghana, but I think they're not going to make it out of that group. But the two spots between Portugal, South Korea, and Uruguay are very much up for grabs.
Yeah, the one thing that, if you're Portugal, you've at least got the +1 goal differential going into the next two. But then it becomes like, what can South Korea do against Ghana? What can Uruguay do against Ghana? That's probably, to some degree, could end up deciding the tournament, or at least that particular group, and that'll be fascinating to watch. All right, flipping back to Group A and then Group B. So right now, going into the final match day for Group A, you've got the Netherlands on 4 points and +2 goal differential. You've also got Ecuador on the exact same line. Senegal with 3 points and a 0 goal differential, and then Qatar is out at this point. So, the one thing here is that the Netherlands still gets to play Qatar, and that gives them an innate advantage. On the one hand, you'd expect the hosts to put up at least a fight in one game. We saw that out of South Africa in that third game that they played against France back in 2010. But I've also not seen anything out of Qatar thus far that would make me think that they are capable of doing it. They didn't lose by as much as Costa Rica did, but I would also say Qatar's probably, on the whole, probably been the least impressive team that we've seen, and just in terms of the way that they're organized and the way that they play. Which, if you give Netherlands the 3 points there, and I think that's fair to do, it comes down to Ecuador-Senegal at this point. And that's a really fascinating matchup. Two really exciting teams that really love to push the pace. I would probably lean towards Ecuador here, both because I think they're slightly more skilled and they certainly have better goalkeeping. Where's your thought process at this point?
Yeah, I was alluding to it before. I hope Ecuador go into that game not playing for the draw, because they clearly can score goals when going forward. And at Valencia, although he came off injured, I hope he plays, because he looks a goal threat wherever. If the ball gets to him in the box, it could be hitting the back of the net. And yeah, I think Senegal just look a little bit shaky at the back. So I would expect Ecuador to get a point out of that. But I think the dynamics of a lost match day always come into play with the mental side of it, players thinking that a draw will do and sitting back and losing their tactical style, whereas Senegal can just go for it from the outset.
Yeah.
Senegal know they need to win, so they'll just go for it. They'll try and get goals. They'll just keep playing their usual way. Whereas Ecuador, I hope the fact that they're in the driver's seat doesn't throw them off their path.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because, the Netherlands could very well win. This might end up coming down to goal differential. Now, if Ecuador ends up winning, it won't matter necessarily. I'm sure they'll be happy to go through regardless of whether they're first or second. But since we're looking at the whole tournament, then it's like, well, do you want to finish first or second? Do you want to play the Netherlands or Ecuador if you're coming out of Group B? And I would rather play the Netherlands right now. They look very ordinary, and Ecuador looks really incisive, and they would scare whoever I think had to play them in the first round of the knockout stage.
Yeah, I don't think there's a side that you're particularly looking to play there or not to play. I think that throws the situation in Group B into even more kind of question, in a sense that if England do come first, it's, well, maybe we shouldn't have even come first. I'm like you. I'd probably rather play Netherlands right now. Ecuador look like they could grab a result. They'll be wanting revenge against England. It's a repeat, or could potentially be a repeat of World Cup 2006 in the round of 16 when England beat Ecuador 1-0. So that would be a storyline for them. But I think it makes it really interesting. I like this A and B grouping. with B being really strong and A being kind of a lot up in the air, and kind of no one was expecting that out of Group A.
And then Group B, the dynamics are fascinating because there's two teams that have to win in order to advance, and that's the United States and Wales. And it's funny because like nobody's qualified yet. Like England, despite having a +4 goal differential and on 4 points, is not necessarily safe. I mean, likely they're going to advance, and it would be the wildest set of circumstances for them not. I mean, it would require the U.S. winning, and it would also require Wales winning by 3 goals, I think, or something like that. Even actually be more than that. It'd be like 6 goals in order to qualify ahead of England. But that's what makes it fascinating. I mean, the U.S., the equation is very simple. They can't draw against Iran, because if they draw against Iran will have more points than them, and England will have more points than them. So they have to win. And then Wales, the only route out for them at this point is they have to win, and they have to hope that Iran doesn't beat the United States or draw the United States. I guess there's technically a route where they could make it through if Wales won by like 2 or 3 goals. But for England, it's like, well, now you're almost playing kind of a rearguard action because you can't afford to lose. If you draw, you're in. And if you're Iran, you can play for the draw, and you're most likely going to get in. So a lot of drama that's going to encompass everything here on Tuesday as these sets of teams end up squaring off against each other.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same thing as Group A, where the dynamics of playing for a draw come into play. And historically, that has thrown players mentally, and it's thrown managers mentally. Managers make late game changes. They change their formation, play a 5 at the back, play really defensive, out of the tactical style. So we'll see. I don't think that will happen in a sense. I think players understand these days that they should stick to their tactical style, the thing they know best, and try to play that way. But it's certainly, the players will know that they only need a point to go through, and that when you're on the pitch and maybe you have had 10 minutes of constant pressure against you, you decide we should just try and sit in for this next 20, and then the opponents score in the 90th minute, and then you're in a sticky situation.
And I mean, and I guess my last question for you in particular. So for England, this is another game. This is a game to get to the next round. For Wales, to borrow an American phrase, this is their Super Bowl, like the chance to play against England on the world stage with a chance to win and like at least give yourself a fighting chance to go through. Does that make you nervous at all going into this final match?
Oh, 100%. Wales can go out of this group stage, and if they beat England, their fans will be happy. They know they weren't going to win the World Cup. But if they got grouped in with England, which for them was great, they see that as that's marquee matchup for them. They win, the country goes wild. They couldn't care less if they don't make it out of the group. So they'll go for it, even if they know that statistically they're long shots to make it out. They will go for it. They'll be hassling England. It'll be a chippy game for sure. That'll happen. They'll try to get England. They'll try to get in England's heads. They will try to make it an aggressive, rough match. They've got Kiefer Moore, 6'5" up top. It's going to be like that. It's going to be old school football. It's going to be aggressive, and probably won't be fun to watch from the technical standpoint, but from the entertainment standpoint, I imagine it's going to be a fun, fiery one to watch.
It's going to be wild. Looking forward to it. Really, I don't think we could have asked for more. That's the thing. Like in these World Cup groups, individually, you want your team to qualify immediately. From an entertainment perspective, both games mattering going into the final day is always something that ups the ante significantly and amps the emotion up to a level where, you can just feel it. It's palpable. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that. And certainly we've got a lot more coming up here over the course of the next couple of days that we'll be keeping an eye on, as well as the games over the next couple of days. All the stuff that we saw these last 2 days, it's like, well, how much of that matters at the end of the day? We're going to find out. Tomorrow we get Tunisia, Australia. Good luck waking up for that one, folks, at 5 a.m. We get Poland and Saudi Arabia at 8. We get France, Denmark at 11. We get Argentina, Mexico at 2. Anything out of that stand out for you in particular that you're looking forward to seeing?
The first thing that stands out to me is I think quite a few people might be taking a lion after the last week. I think some people might be sleeping through Poland and Saudi Arabia as well.
I got to be honest. I tried to sleep in today. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do myself a favor. I'm going to skip Wales, Iran, because I didn't think it was going to happen. So 2 things happened. A, I woke up, no alarm, woke up on my own at 5:10 this morning. And I was like, I guess I'm getting up to watch the game. And then the second thing that happened was it was an awesome game. I mean, I felt a lot that and the Argentina Saudi Arabia game. I felt vindicated for getting up that early. But yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think people may be sleeping in. France Denmark is. I mean, those two later games are both great games. It's going to be interesting to see if France and Argentina, both teams who at times didn't look amazing. France in the first half of their first game looked questionable. They obviously pulled through in the second half and showed their firepower. And Argentina obviously coming off that outstanding loss. So they will be looking to really kind of make a statement against Mexico, a good team. If they can win 2-3-0, people will forget about the Saudi Arabia game and they should be able to go through out of that group. And then France will be looking to get a result, but they'll know that Denmark are not going to be an easy side. I wouldn't be surprised if that game ends in a draw or if Denmark do get a result.
Yeah, I mean, Denmark wins that game. They're at that point probably topping the group unless Tunisia beats Australia, which is certainly possible. It's hard to exactly know how Australia fares against not France, but yeah, the other one's also fascinating. I mean, Argentina, they don't need to blow out Mexico, but they probably need to win by 2 goals because they got to make up some goal differential. And if this Poland team is ever going to make a play to like look serious in a World Cup and get past the group stage and do something in the knockout stage, they have to win this game and probably do so somewhat decisively. So, and then Saudi Arabia has got to be like, hey, you know what? We just went out and beat one of the 2 prohibitive favorites for the World Cup. Why can't we beat Poland? Because Poland doesn't exactly look great when they played against Mexico. So, a lot of fascinating storylines and a lot of things that are going to be interesting for people to watch tomorrow as we go into those games. So we'll see how it goes. Should be a really interesting set of games tomorrow, and we'll really probably amp the action up, especially if Australia can somehow pull off a result against Tunisia. Could be another group where we end up with every game mattering as we go into that final game of the group stage. So anyway, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Any final thoughts from you before we do so?
Not particularly. I thought it was fantastic to see USA v England, see so many Americans out watching this wonderful game. I think that I'm excited to see the numbers from Fox's broadcast, but I imagine it will be one of the most watched U.S. soccer games of all time. I enjoyed it. I went to a bar and there was hundreds of people watching that, chanting the one U.S. chant that you guys have, but maybe you can work on that. But other than that, I think it's great to see so many people out supporting, enjoying the World Cup, coming together. It's fantastic. And we've got more weeks to come.
Yeah, no, I was out at the bar as well. It was packed at Switchyard Brewing Company here in Bloomington. It was a good watching experience. Couldn't get any chance going. I tried. I really did. So maybe next time we'll get something going. But yeah, good times today. U.S., I think, with a pretty good result for them overall, and should be fascinating to see what happens moving forward. So Daniel, thank you as always for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks to all you folks for watching or listening in. Be sure to subscribe to Pod of the Century, as we'll be giving you coverage from this point on out. We skipped Thanksgiving. We'll be back talking about every match day from this point forward. And we will also, of course, be giving you little tidbits and previews of what's coming up in the future here. So we will catch you folks on the flip side. For Daniel Eves, I'm Galen Clavio. So long, everybody.